everybody. My name is Debbie, and I am a wildlife biologist, and we are here at Tule Ponds at Tyson's Lagoon. This is an area that has had water in it for thousands of years, and that's because we run along the Hayward Fault. Hayward Fault runs right through here. So as that fault is moving, it has access for the water to come up between that fault line. So we know that there's been water here for thousands of years, but back in the time when we're talking about this Ohlone period, our waterways would have been much bigger. So Tyson's Lagoon would have been a lot bigger. Alameda Creek would have been bigger. So it wouldn't have been a big deal to even get all the way to the coast if you wanted to try to find some food, okay? So again, a very different time. All right, you should see on your screen right now the 3 dots moving around and the msnucleus.org. You can always go to that website and get more information about Tyson's Lagoon. You'll see Tule Ponds at Tyson's Lagoon. So you can learn about all the animals and plants that are here if you've not ever been here before. Right now we are closed and this area is fenced off. We are right next to the BART station. We're at the back of the Fremont BART station off of Walnut Avenue is where our entrance is. But we are closed off so that the animals and plants here have a safe place to live. Okay. Now, as far as the exploring the Ohlones, we do have some artifacts that have been found here. So we know that the Ohlones were in this area. Because of the area of the Hayward Fault, this area has been, again, protected and had water for a very long time. So again, we have found some of these artifacts here, and we have those here in our classroom. So when we open back up, you'll be able to see those, and we'll share a lot of those with you today. So if you look at this little picture, look at this cute little guy. So they are dressed up in their regalia. That's not a costume. They're not in a costume. That's their regalia. So they dress up in their regalia for special ceremonies, and they use the different feathers. Everything has a meaning. But the Ohlones here in this area in Alameda County, they lived as hunter-gatherers. So they kind of had to know the seasons, like what plants and animals were going to be around at different times of the year so that they could harvest and have enough to eat. So if they didn't have enough, they couldn't go to a store, right? None of that was around. We had to look at how plants were used for transportation and how they used plants in construction. So yeah, they made some houses. They had to have some protection, but very different than what we have now. They also used some tools, and they had a lot of ceremonies and entertainment. So they're really no different than you. They like to do some of the same fun stuff that you guys do. It just looked a little different at the time. All right, so if you look at this map, the dark yellow are the areas of the different tribes of the Ohlone. And where we are, Alameda County, up at the top, there's the San Francisco Bay. We are where they spoke the language called Chochenyo. So Chochenyo is the grouping of the Ohlones that mostly we're discussing today, that would have lived here in this area between Tule Ponds. And they were grouped by their subgroups of their languages. So they lived and they hunted and they collected all along the waterways, right? Because if you have water, that's where you're going to have plants and animals, okay? So the Alameda Creek area specifically was used for their transportation, for food, and a water source. And as you look up at the East Bay Hills, they probably went up into that area to find the larger game and for their plant sources. All right, so again, the Chochenyo language, we're looking at where Alameda County. Later on, we will have someone that's from the Rumsen tribe that's down at the bottom there towards Monterey. So this is what a typical Tule village would kind of look like. In the background, you see the water and the reeds. The reeds would be these kind of green reeds that are growing in the water. Those are the tules. And you would have lots of willows and oak trees. You see the rocks and the grasses, but those huts were made of the tules. And you see they had a little shade area. That's probably where they're working on drying some meat. There was also a mat there made of the tules. The tules are kind of squishy, so they would be something comfortable to sit on and also be insulated for the huts. And then look at the picture on the other side. On the very, very low part, let me see if I can find my cursor. Down here, I'm circling my cursor. I'm not sure if you can see it or not, but that's Tule Ponds at Tyson's Lagoon. So that's where I am now. Again, at this time period, the lagoon would be much, much bigger. So these are quarry lakes. That was not there. That was just a lowland. And then this is the Masonic home that's off of Mission Boulevard. So this is the area where they would have gone up into the hills, probably for their large game hunting and some gatherings seasonally. When at the rainy times, they would go more up towards that Masonic home. They would go more up towards the hills. And as the summers got drier, they would come back down towards the water where I am now. So again, this is a quick look at Tule Ponds at Tyson's Lagoon.
Welcome to Tule Ponds. This wetland center is owned by Alameda County and managed by the Math Science Nucleus. As you enter into our door, you start to see the wonder of Tule Ponds. Tule Ponds has not only biological and geological features, but it also has a lot of cultural, like the Ohlone peoples that lived in this area. The artifacts that you see here will be discussed in length as we understand the Ohlone culture at Tule Ponds.
All right, so as you're looking at those cases of artifacts, you may know them as arrowheads or projectile points, but remember, we're thinking back a couple hundred years. There aren't as many people here. They're just the small villages. There are no roads, no concrete, no asphalt, no cars. Your feet and the water is how you had to transport, not even horses, okay? All right, let's keep going. Now, this is a little storybook that, again, you can look up and read again if you'd like on our website, called Growing Up Ohlone. This is a story about two little kids, about y'all's age, just like you guys. You look, the young girl, she is wearing a Tule skirt, again, made from the tules here. The little boy is wearing a deer skin. You see their necklaces are made probably with shells and beads, and they have hats, again, decorated. So again, think about how you would live, you know, all that long hair, you'd have to brush it. How would you brush your teeth? How'd you go to the bathroom? Just how would you get dressed? All these things. Maybe our little storybook will answer those. So here we go, Growing Up Ohlone.
Growing Up Ohlone by Joyce Bluford, animated by Hagos Stavolti. Sun and Moon lived in a village of Ohlone people near a river with fast running water in an area called Tubon. They were the children of Poilemja, a Bay Miwok, and Jock Bakmi, an Ohlone. They spoke the Churchena language. Sun and Moon loved summer because they could play in the water and eat fruit and nuts that would be on nearby plants. During the summer, the steelhead would swim up the river to lay their eggs. It was easy to catch fish with just your bare hands. Autumn was now approaching. The trees along the river were changing. Some trees kept their leaves, and some trees would turn colors and fall to the ground. The nights were getting longer, and there was a chill in the air. Plants were important to provide food, while others would be used to make baskets. Tule would make a home, while coast live oak would make an acorn mush to eat. Sun and Moon were only 4 and 7, so they still played together. Sun was the older boy, and his father was starting to teach him the ways of a hunter. Moon would help her mother, especially when picking seeds, nuts, and blackberries. The elders knew it was getting colder because the sun was getting lower in the sky. They had to prepare for the cold that would follow. On this warm day, the men were fishing in the large river. The women walked to far places to collect acorns from live oak trees. Many of the children were left in the village under the watchful eyes of the elders. Sun and Moon were being watched by their grandmother. She was distracted when two boys began to fight. Sun thought he saw a deer at the edge of the village. He thought that his father would be proud if he was able to bring home a deer. Sun had no fear and used the bow and arrow that he made with his father and followed the deer. Sun concentrated on what he would do and followed the deer without thinking about where he was going. Moon saw Sun and followed him quietly. She was proud of her hunter brother. They followed the deer for a long time, and the familiar area around the river changed into a lagoon. There were tules and cattails along the edge, with lots of trees creating a shady canopy. Sun could no longer see the deer and turned back to the village. He saw Moon under a small bush. Sun was surprised. "Moon, what are you doing here?" Moon put her head down. "I just wanted to see what you were doing." Moon started to sob. "Sun, I don't know where we are and I am hungry. Grandmother is going to be very mad at us." Sun replied, "I will protect you. I am old enough to know how to get back." They found an old Tule hut with a Tule boat on the side. Sun was hoping that someone lived there and might be able to help, but the house was abandoned, probably used by hunters when they were fishing. Sun thought he would find Moon some food, and they would sleep there overnight, and when the sun rose, he would be able to find the village. He remembered his father saying that if he got lost, to walk toward the rising sun. Sun still had the spear he made with his father. He tried to fish in the clear water, but he could not catch a fish. The days were getting shorter, so Sun knew they did not have much time to find their village. He was having trouble remembering which way he should walk. He looked at the real sun, and he knew they would not be able to make it to the village before it got dark. Sun found some tools to make fire that was left in the hut. His father had given him lessons because fire could feed them as well as protect them. He would hear his father's words, "Fire would keep you warm at night, but help protect you from the wolves, coyote, and raccoons. Animals do not like fire." Sun was glad he would not have to worry about the bears, because most of them were at the river fishing for salmon. His father had told him a story of bears that eat many salmon. They become lazy and just go to sleep. There was a holly leaf cherry tree nearby, and the fruit had just ripened. The fruit had a slightly sweet taste. The woman would roast the nut and make it into a sweet meal, which they would make into a bread to eat. Moon would have to just eat the fruit because they did not know how to make the meal. They found some pepper nut, California bay laurel, that was already shelled and roasted. These were good to eat, so Moon and Sun ate a few. Nearby were some snowberry, but Sun knew not to eat them because they would make you feel sleepy. He knew he had to stay awake to protect his sister. Moon felt safe with her big brother, so she did not cry. This made Sun feel very important. In the distance, he heard his father and uncle's loud voice trying to find them. Sun, at the top of his voice, yelled, "Father, we are in the Tule hut." His father ran and picked up both his children and hugged them. Sun demanded that he let him down as he exclaimed, "Father, I took care of Moon. I did everything you taught me, but I promise I will not try to hunt without you." The end. Special thanks to Vincent Medina, who is trying to bring back the Chochenna language. word by word.
All right. So luckily things worked out for Sun and Moon, but he could have also gotten in trouble, right? Because he didn't follow his rules and stay there at the village. So our parents come up with rules for us, not to bug us or make us mad, but they come up with rules to keep us safe. Okay, but you see all the things that Sun and Moon had remembered, their lessons that their parents had taught them, things they had learned over their childhood, just like you guys are learning as you grow up. You learn more and more. One of the things that was funny is that, again, they had to just find their way around. They couldn't pull out their cell phone and find ways and figure out where they were. They couldn't pull up a WhatsApp and send a message to their dad. Remember, they had to, we're talking a long time ago, before we had a lot of these inventions that we have now. The Chochenyo language was one that was not recorded. It was not written down. It was a language that was verbal and passed around generation by generation. Okay, now if you look at this picture, you will also see they're starting to work on a Tule hut, and the frame is made of the willow branches. Okay, so that's how they start the frame. So again, thanks to Vincent Medina, we are learning more and more of that Chochenyo language, going back through records, putting it together. So let's look at this Tule, the rukosh. The Tule is this long green plant that's growing in the water. It grows in the water and near the water. Only has one small leaf, grows way taller than you guys. And it's got kind of a spongy inside. But the Ohlones knew that they could take this Tule, they could cut it, dry it, lay it out flat to dry, and then it would can be wetted and be formed in all different areas. Like you could bend it to make things like this little duck decoy. Okay, they made boats, huts, shoes, cordage, and more from these tules. So let's get a closer look and listen to the background. If you were here early, see if you can figure out what bird is in the background. That's our Canada geese in the background. Remember, our ducks honk, or our geese honk, and our ducks quack. So that was some honking from our Canada geese. All right. So these Tule, the light green areas where the species that we have grows. And in this area, because we're so developed, we have plowed down most of our wetlands and there are very few Tules left. Lake Elizabeth has a few Tules. If you look at any small wetlands, you might see some Tules here and there, but most of our Tules have disappeared. But the Ohlones would use these Tules for everything. They would see this basket, they'd have to make the basket. They couldn't go to a store to buy one. They would have to make it. And then just like for you kids, as far as toys and things that they like to play with and do, look, there's a little model boat. So they could play with that boat in the river and the water and see if it would float, see if it could carry cargo. They made Tule dolls, all kinds of things. So again, those kids would be just like you guys. They want to do the same things that you do. All right, now let's take a little closer look at our Tule. Again, you see it is growing, the root is deep in the water, and that's actually how that plant spreads, is by the root. It does have a small seed on the top. They could harvest those seeds. The animals would also use this area for hiding and for eating those small seeds. They would use it for shelter. So again, anytime you've got the water in the Tules, you've got the habitat, you're going to have more little fish, frogs, lizards, birds, all of those things. All right, you also see a Tule hut. And again, the Tule hut was made with these Tules, and that would be where a small family, 3 or 4 people would live. Just enough protection. So let's look at a closer look.
This is a thicket of Tule. Art is cutting one of the Tules, and you can see one of the leaf on the bottom there. And he's going to be peeling it away to see this spongy texture. Now there's a lot of air in there, and that air is what makes it float. But that skin, when it dries and then gets wet again, is waterproof, making it a very versatile plant for the Ohlones.
All right, so you see that spongy part. So that's kind of like our like bubble wrap. If you've ever played with bubble wrap, when you hold a piece of Tule, when you squish it around, it just feels like you're popping bubble wrap. If you were hungry, you could eat it. It would taste a little bit like celery. But again, that waterproof outside is what allowed them to then use it for their huts and for their boats. All right. And did you see how Art was cutting it with a knife? Okay, back then, if you were an Ohlone, how would you cut? We wouldn't have knives like that. Think about what you would use. We're going to find out in a minute. All right, so here we are making the Tule hut called the Ruway. And you see the finished Ruway at the top. But look at all these tules spread out. Dr. Joyce is going to tell us a little bit about it.
We're walking down toward the creek. We notice a structure being built. And it looks like the tules that are along the side, which have been cut, are now going to be part of a Tule hut.
All right, and that Tule hut was made by some Eagle Scouts, and there were about 10 of them, and it took them about 2 months working on the weekends to cut all the tules, get them drying, to make the base frame using the willow, and then to attach those tules. And you look at the finished hut, the outside part, they'll lay tules down, and then they kind of put a hula hoop around of the willow branches. Then they lay more tules, put another hula hoop, so that if the wind blows, it's not going to blow your hut over, right? So it's kind of giving it some stability there. All right, and here is a Tule boat. Now this is called a Walli, and again used for transportation. There's a big picture, the gray and white picture is of a larger boat, and you can see Linda is in a boat there, used almost like a modern day kayak.
This is a Tule boat. You can see how it's floating. A big Tule boat could take up to 2 to 3 150-pound men.
So we have a lot of fun in summer camps and all of that. Sometimes we make these little boats. I've got an example of one here where we make these boats and then we see if we can get them to float, just like you saw in that example there. But again, as a kid, you would practice making these smaller toys so that as your skill got better, you'd be able to practice and make a real boat and a real house. All right, let's listen up.
Fall is around the corner, and we see we have activity on building a Tule boat. The Tule hut is right next to it, and then we come to the production of a boat. So this is the various stages. They have to cut the tules first, dry them, then wet them, and then start molding them into pieces of a boat. We'll look at the final version as soon as it's done.
Now, we are back, if you've been to Tule Ponds before, we are back by the butterfly garden where there's a small creek that comes in. And if you notice, there are apartments and houses all around us, and then the BART station, the parking lots on the other side. So we are basically surrounded by everything. Remember, the Hayward Fault comes through here, and by law, those buildings only have to be 50 feet away from the fault lines. So again, we're kind of a little protected area here. But you see the Tule hut and you see the boat. It's in the process of being created. The boat was created by some Girl Scouts. And there in the bottom picture, you see the boat all together. So again, it would be used much like a modern day kayak, okay, with the big pedal. You got a closer look there at the outside of the Ruway, the Tule house, how it was made. All right, so if you think about making that boat though, they had to wrap some bundles together and they would use something called cordage. And the cordage is something they'd have to make with what they had around them, just the plants around them. A lot of times the boats were made with the grapevines. You know how grapevines are kind of long and stringy? So they would use those as the cordage. They would use tules, redbuds, willows, sedges and rushes and horsetails, all these different plants to make different products. So they would see that little fish trap there. There's a small basket. There's an opening. The fish goes in and it can't usually find its way back out. Our modern day fish traps look just like that. They look just like them, but they're usually made out of metal or plastic. You see a lady there doing their basket weaving. Again, she couldn't go to the store to buy all those reeds. She would have to go and collect them. You look at the shoe, because they didn't have stores there, right? So again, if you were tender-footed, then you might make yourself a shoe out of the tule. And if you look at the netting, they're trying to catch the ducks. Okay, even that would have to be made. So they didn't have rope, you'd have to make your own rope. Even your food or platters or things that you would collect or eat off of, those would have to be used. Sometimes they used things like the Up Ohlone shells, but again, you would have to make things with what you had around you. So you are making things from these objects that you see right here. The grasses kind of bend over and have knees. And you see the sedge at the bottom has a kind of a triangle shape to it. And the one at the top is all round. So again, these are rushes, willows, pine needles, redbuds. Again, that's what you're going to be using to create things. Let's get a closer look at this Western redbud. And it has got a heart-shaped leaf. So keep an eye out for these as you're walking around and driving around the area. You'll see these planted all around. They're usually the first things to bloom in the spring with that kind of purple bloom. And the bark is real smooth in color. So that is the Western redbud. And they would have those young shoots because they're very bendable.
This is a redbud tree. The Ohlones loved these trees to make long-lasting baskets. If you look close up to the young shoots, you'll notice the reddish color. They're very, very bendable and were very desirable, creating baskets that would last for a long time.
So you may have some baskets at your house. So when we're done with this class and you're done with your day's homework, kind of look around at some of those patterns in the baskets that you have. But you'll see this is a little blip on making a willow basket. Now look at how small this weaving is, and it's decorated with some beads.
My foundation are these 3 rods, 3 sticks really, of willow. 3 willow rods, 2 are side by side, and the 3rd one is sitting on the top in the groove. And I'm wrapping around all 3. I'll show you here. I'm going to be punching a hole just to pick up that one on the top. Sometimes it takes me a bit. I really have to find the right place where my tool exits so that I don't break the stitch.
What do you think? That takes a lot of time. It's a lot of work. It's a lot of practice and learning how to do that. And you see this basket is also decorated with beads or shells as well. So again, we are looking at different weaving techniques and different weaving patterns. If you look at this picture again this afternoon, maybe look around your house and see if you have any baskets or you can find anything that has this kind of warp or weave to it. Okay. Now let me show you a quick, Phoebe's got us a hat and a basket to show you.
Ohlones used all kinds of plants to weave baskets and other tools. This is redbud, which is a tree. This is a sedge. And this is a rush. And they would weave that to make things like this, which is a basket. And can you tell what this is? This is actually a hat.
Now, isn't that funny? For a long time, we thought that hat was actually a basket, but then we learned more and more and figured out that those baskets were, or the hats were made to the person's head size, and they were used in special ceremonies. But again, you saw how tricky that weave is on that hat. All right, so here's some examples using paper for weaving, and then also just even simply braiding some other grasses.
We also have some patterns here that are weaved with grasses. These are long iris leaves. Some of you may have played with the rainbow looms of the past, the rainbow rubber bands I think you guys weaved, or friendship bracelets. All of those are a type of weaving as well, modern day weaving. Here we're even trying to weave with some very small green branches.
Look at that
So you're trying to
chair.
do a braid, or you cross over and get into the middle.
That chair is.
So if you don't know how to braid, this is a good time to learn.
And see how
I'm
they
making all
folded
kinds
a
of
piece
weaves.
of paper over, cut it at the fold.
So you can use all different types of materials. You can all use nature materials. You can do products inside your house, all different types.
So again, it's just a process of going back and forth. Even things today like macrame, the friendship bracelets, those are also a form. Even if your grandparents know how to do the, gosh, with the long needles, I just blanked on the names, crocheting and knitting. Again, a kind of weaving. Even all your clothes are usually a kind of weave as well. All right, Phoebe's going to show you how to make a basket, and this is a worksheet that's online. This is something that you can do at home. And if you don't have access to this worksheet, don't worry about it. Your teachers will get it to you. And teachers, you can find this worksheet the same place that you registered. And let's see how you make a basket.
Today we're making paper baskets. So first we're going to print out that worksheet that you have attached, and you're going to cut the template out at the bottom of the page and then trace it onto a piece of stiff paper. I'm just using an index card here. So once you have that traced out, you're going to grab a pair of scissors and cut it out. So then you'll end up with a shape like this. And from here you can color or draw on it however you like. And then we're going to start weaving with the thread. You can use any kind of yarn, whatever color you like. And you're going to stick it between two of these flaps here. And make sure you hold it up so it kind of forms the shape of a bowl. And you're going to hold this thread in place with your finger and just go inside and outside these flaps, alternating like that. So you're weaving. And you're going to keep going like this, around in circles, until you go up to about maybe a 1/4 of an inch under the top. So as you can see this basket here, we've gotten to the top there. And once you're finished, you're going to cut your thread where you're done, and then you're going to tuck that loose end into one of the rope threads underneath. And then once that stage is done, you're just going to fold the remaining flap edges over the edge of the bowl like this to form the rim of the bowl. And once you have those all folded down, you're done, and you have a little woven paper basket.
So once you practice it first with the small pattern we've given you, you can try a bigger plate, and you can even try it with a cup, like a plastic cup or a paper cup. If you cut it down again, you can weave back and forth, and it'll give you a different shaped container. Okay? But if you were a loanie, you wouldn't have the paper that you bought at the store and the yarn. You would be using the willow branches or the redbud branches for your base, and then you would be using the different grasses or the different branches for your weaving. All right, again, that's a worksheet that your teacher can get to you. But if you think about all the things that you do today, like you guys just had some lunch. Did anybody eat some lunch that was cooked? How did you cook your lunch? We didn't have microwaves. We didn't have ovens. If you wanted to cook something, like if you wanted some nice warm soup, how in the world would you get warm soup? They would use this cooking basket. Look at how close and how tight that weave is so that it would hold water. So they could create their soup, they could put their water in there, they could get their little nuts and their vegetables, do whatever they had for their soup, and then they would take some hot stones out of a fire. And they would use something like this made of the tule reeds, or they would just use 2 long pieces of wood, and they would collect those hot stones out of the fire, put that in the cooking basket. Those hot stones would then warm their soup. That's how they would cook some of those. But again, anything they got, they had to get it ready. So you see here another loanie using a mortar and pestle. So you might have one of those that you use at home as well for small spices, cutting them up. But this is just a big rock. Let me see if I can lift it. A big heavy rock with a hole in the bottom. So this is what they would use to grind up their acorns. So the acorns, they wouldn't eat the cap. You'd have to get rid of that. And then you still have to break open the hard shell and get rid of that. So they would use that by using this pestle, so another rock, and they would crunch it up. And if you see, this rock has 2 holes that have been worn into it. And that is from hundreds of years of actually being used and passed down. So that would make that work a little bit easier. Now, if I was doing it today, am I going to use a mortar and pestle to squish up that acorn into meal? Like corn even, to make cornmeal? No, I'm going to use my food processor, chop it up, my blender, or I'm going to buy it already done at the store. So again, that's how our lives have changed. And again, this is a process that would have been taught over many generations. Even looking at the basket next to them, it's a long basket which had a strap. So they would carry, the strap would face right along their forehead and carry the basket on their back. So again, our Ohlonies were hunters, both on the land and in the water. So in the water, they would use nets. They would use, look at that shell fish hook. Do you ever think about that? Using a piece of a shell, how it breaks off? This again, marshy land where the tules are, those long green tules. Again, a great nursery for small fish, small birds. And again, they had their tule boats. But they have to have other tools. If they're going to go hunting for larger mammals, then they need arrowheads. And they had spears for very large game, the hooks for the fish, and also a need for blades to be able to prepare their food. If you think about when you use your knives and forks and spoons, how you have to cut up some of the things that you eat. And in talking about what they ate, we know from looking at their middens, M-I-D-D-E-N, a midden, not a mitten, but a midden is like a trash pile. So the central part of your village, your trash, of course, would be on the outside, but we can learn from looking at these trash piles what they ate. And these bones, you'll see they are from deer, birds, elk, rabbit, turtle, fish. Again, they would take these bones. If they didn't have a use, then again, they would go to that midden. Sometimes they could use them though for decorations or some necklaces, or again, for fish hooks, things like that. So again, that's looking at their trash pile. So do you think I could learn anything about you if I looked in your trash pile? I bet I could. I bet I could figure out what you like to eat and drink, kind of clothes you like to wear, kind of things you like to do, just from looking at your trash. All right, so I'm thinking about the animals that they would hunt. So remember in our story, the dad talked about the bear, don't worry about the bear because they're busy eating the fish, and they get sleepy. But we did have the very large elk, and you see the rabbit there with the big long ears, so that would be up where it's more dry. And our antelope there. And here's what in the story where the father was talking about the fish going upstream. So we have our salmon, also called the rainbow trout in the freshwater. So these are fish that start out, they lay their eggs in the streams, the cold, look how fast that water is moving. It's fast water and it's cold. So they lay their eggs there. The fish hatches out of that egg, goes down the stream to the ocean, spends a couple years in the ocean, starts to change a little bit, comes back upstream, and look how the fish is jumping upstream. It takes a lot of energy for this fish to make it all the way back up to where it was born. Somehow they know the exact stream where they were eggs and they hatched out. So this is the salmon. That's when the bear would be sitting there. Remember they talked about how it was so easy they could catch the fish by hand. So when the salmon are coming up, but we no longer have these because our water now, if you look at Alameda Creek, slow moving water, right? It's not fast, it's slow and it's warm. So unless we can get fast moving cold water, we won't be able to get our salmon back. All right, as far as birds, lots of small songbirds, and they would use nets and all to catch those. Medium size, like the ducks, they could use a bow and arrow, they could use snares, they could use nets, and the larger geese, again, that you see flying there. And again, they had great respect for any of these animals. So they would have a ceremony before they even went out to hunt, and use then every part of that animal that they took their life of. So as far as the tools for hunters, these would be those arrowheads or projectile points.
Okay, these are two arrowheads. One is not from this area and the other one is. This first black one is made out of obsidian, and it probably comes from Clear Lake area. This one, which is a chert, probably was found here and is made out of chert. This is the arrowheads that the Ohlones from this area would have used. And then this plant in the background is called mule fat. Mule fat they would make the arrowhead, so when they did actually make an arrow and it pierced something, they were able to pull the arrow out, the arrowhead back.
All right. So again, this is something you would learn as a young kid. You would learn how to hit two pieces of stone together, and depending on the properties of the rock, the stone would break or cleave off to give that sharp edge. And so once you get going, you could make a whole bunch of points in a little bit of time. It doesn't take that long to make them. But again, you've got to find the right rocks to be able to make those points. Now, all of these different shapes were an experiment to see what shape you needed for the animal you're hunting. If you're going after a bear or a deer or a rabbit, it would be very different, right? So if you look at how these shapes are, look at the tips and the edges where they're serrated, and then the notch or the base. So a lot of times the base would be a rod or a stick that they would cut down the middle, and this arrowhead would slide right in the middle like that. And then they would bind with cordage or sinew. They would bind that arrowhead then down so they could reclaim that arrowhead. Okay, so again, we find, several of those have been found here in this area because we know that there were Ohlones here. Again, there's lots of sites all around California. And this is, again, a worksheet that is online. If you don't have it yet, don't worry about it. Your teacher will get it to you. All right, so as far as hunting games, in our story, they went out to try to hunt a deer to make his dad proud. But it doesn't start out that way, right? You got to practice, like all things. School, sports, everything. You've got to practice before you get really good. So here's some ideas of.
Okay, here we go with our first game. We're going to pretend that we are hunting. We've got some hula hoops that are up in our tree. We've got a yellow one on the far left, a pink and a green one. You see the bear stalking in their tree as well. All right, kids, you guys are going to take turns. You've got to stand behind the pink line or the purple line, the line that's the rope that's on the ground. You're going to stand behind that and see how many of the targets you can hit. Okay, off you go.
All right, so they are just throwing like pine cones or little balls made of raffia.
Easy enough, right?
It seemed easy when they were close.
You got to get all three targets.
And if they're not allowed to change and they have to stay where the rock landed or the pine cone landed, it gets a little bit harder.
So again, another good thing to use would be pool noodles if we had pool noodles. These are, again, just balls of raffia that have been wound up, long grasses that are kind of knotted up.
So this kind of goes back to some of our sports that we have now, like baseball, basketball, lacrosse, things like that, where it's a skill that you're practicing and you're going to use it later in a different purpose. But again, these are just small games that the kids would play. So instead of using hula hoops that are plastic, of course, they would have used the branches of the willows or those redbuds. All right, here is another game.
So now we're trying the Tule reeds. It's a little bit harder because those reeds are lighter. So again, we're trying to hit a moving target. Our target might be, say, a white-tailed deer or a rabbit. So again, takes a little practice to be a great hunter.
See how they're taking the hula hoop and they flip it up and throw it out so that it gets farther away.
We're trying to read our targets over here. Oh, good. Kinsley even got the pink one.
So again, it's just a way of practicing that skill.
Kinsley, you gotta stay behind the purple line. Stay behind the line.
Here we go. Targets on the move.
Even doing that with the hula hoop is a trick in itself. Something to practice.
Again,
all right, so as they are hunting, then they would have these animals and they would use every part of the animal. Everything had a purpose. It was very valued and respected. And these are some of the bone tools that they would use. See this large one, the large flat piece, that's like a scapula or a shoulder blade. But they would use, again, all these different bones as their tools. Let's take a closer look at these three.
Here we have some bone tools that were used by the Ohlones. These two are awls that were used to sew and weave using these pointed tips right here at the bottom. And this right here is a bone saw. You can actually see the teeth carved into the bone right there.
All right, so remember earlier when Art was cutting the tule with the metal knife, he had that metal piece. Instead of cutting a tule with that, you would use something like this. You would use a bone tool. All right, so again, they don't want to just sit around all the time. They'd get so bored, just like you guys. They wouldn't have computers to jump on. They wouldn't have video games. Couldn't go to the movies. But you see, they can all get dressed up. And I know you guys have all gotten dressed up at certain times for something special, right? So if it's something special, they would color themselves up with different kinds of paints. So they would use mud as their paint. Can you imagine going and playing in the mud? It's really fun. So you would find stones and rocks that are different colors, make up your muddy solution, and that would be part of their ceremony as well as their hats and all. But they would have ceremonies and social meetings and gatherings, religious meetings. They'd even do musicals or plays. If you think about when you guys get together sometimes with your friends and you goof around and act out a play, sports, even all of these things, everything that you guys do now, they would do. They just didn't have all of the modern technology that we have now. All right, so here is a blue elderberry. We'll look at this as Art's cutting it. The blue elderberry is another native plant that they would have used a lot for food sources, but then also for entertainment. So once you cut a few pieces, again, they wouldn't have that nice tool to use, right? They would have the bone with the serrated edge. Okay, so the inside of that is called the pith, and that can be cleared out, and then they would make musical instruments, pipes, and jewelry out of this elderberry, just out of the elderberry stem. So you would clean each side out, like each end, until it would be finally all hollow. Again, these are lots of things that you would have to learn when you were younger and practice. All right.
This is an elderberry, and we're going to peel it back down. As you can see, the bark comes off easily, and then the Ohlones would then decorate this and make a clapper stick.
All right, you see the clapper stick on the right. So we've cleaned out the pith, and now they're pulling off that bark, and you see that they were able to decorate that bark using different things like blueberries even that they could smush up, using different dyes and using the cordage to wrap it. And that would be their musical instrument.
This is an Ohlone clapping stick, which is made out of an elderberry stem, and it's a percussion instrument, which means it makes noise when you hit it against something.
All right, so that's our clapper stick. And you will see our clapper stick being used here. This is the Ohlone Cemetery in Fremont. And this was a ceremony a while back where they were blessing and remembering their people of the past. And you will see that the men are on the outside and they will use the clapper sticks. And you'll also see that they're moving funny. Those are all representative of the animals, like most of the animals and things that they are thinking. You'll see the women are wearing more furs and things around their shoulders. And again, notice those hats with the feathers. But listen for those clapper sticks. Okay, so again, you see some of the painting that's on their backs. The men have the river otter around the river otter pelt usually around their waist. And again, all different types of bird feathers. So this is another ceremony called Big Time in California where the Ohlones are dancing. I'll let you listen to this.
Right now, today, we are celebrating a very, very special event. It's the 4th year of a special ceremony that a lot of California Indians do. It's called Big Time. And big time is where California Indians, people who are the indigenous people of California, do their own kind of dancing and ceremony. It's different from a powwow, and is being particularly blessed by the presence of Ohlone people saying their languages, saying prayers in their languages, singing songs in their languages.
Again, you see all the regalia. You see the shells, the bones, the feathers. Again, all being praised. One last little story here.
Afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. My name is Desiree Munoz. Today is Sunday, October 5th, 2000 and I believe 8. And I'm 16 years old, and I am a member of the Kostono Rumsen Karmau tribe, Ohlone. And I just wanted to give you a little bit of information on going back to 7 generations ago of how our people used to wear their regalia proudly. I'm going to start off by telling you a little bit about our hat. Our hat is basically, from back in those days, was made out of tule or willow, and it was formed around to be around and to fit your head, and the type of feathers that you are allowed to use in your hat would be pheasant, duck, hawk, or eagle. But it depends on how high in bloodline that you are. Like me, I am Tony Serta, which is our chief. I am his granddaughter. So I could be allowed to wear eagle feathers. So it doesn't matter if you would or if you wouldn't. But me personally, I am a big fan of the blue jay. So my hat is covered in pheasant with blue jay feathers.
Okay, so that's kind of fun. She was telling you all about her regalia and how it's made. Much of that is passed down over the generations.